This is Walter Bosley. I'm going to read a chapter from Our Haunted Planet by John Keel. Chapter 10, Rendezvous with the Damned. Sometime around the year AD 421, a group of artisans from a now-lost civilization painstakingly engraved a series of gold leaves or plates with cryptic symbols and buried them in a stone box on the west side of a hill near what is now the village of Manchester, New York. They remained there, unknown and untouched, for 1,400 years. Then on Friday, September 21st, 1821, an 18-year-old farm boy named Joseph Smith awoke to a vision in his bedroom near Palmyra, New York. A personage appeared, he said later, standing in the air, for his feet did not touch the floor. This being, dressed in a long robe of most exquisite whiteness, was surrounded by light, and his countenance was truly like lightning. He identified himself as Moroni, a messenger sent from the presence of God, called the youth by name, and announced that he had been chosen for a special task. In subsequent appearances, Moroni gave Joseph Smith the exact location of the box and told him that he was to dig it up when instructed to do so. 6 years passed before Smith received word to unearth the tablets. The date was September 22nd, 1827. That night, the skies were aflame with a spectacular display of meteors, falling stars, and luminous spheres. One of the many witnesses was another young man who lived in northern New York, but was unacquainted with Joseph Smith. His name was Brigham Young. Smith dug into the hillside, found the box exactly as Moroni had said, pried off the lid, and discovered the gold plates along with crystalline devices, which became known as the Urim and the Thummim. He spent the next 3 years translating the strange writing, although he had little formal education, purportedly with the aid of the lens-like objects. 11 of his friends and neighbors signed formal affidavits, swearing they had viewed the plates. But once they had been translated, the gold plates vanished. The messenger called for them, Smith explained. In March 1830, the translation was published by a local printer. It was the Book of Mormon, a history of ancient North America. The following month, the Mormon Church was officially organized with 6 members in Fayette, New York. Today, it has over 4.5 million followers. Joseph Smith was murdered by a hostile mob in Carthage, Illinois in June 1844. Brigham Young became the leader of the harassed band of Mormons who worked their way across the country until they arrived at the rather inhospitable wasteland around the Great Salt Lake in Utah. In 1848, many of the Mormons were dismayed by Young's choice for the site of their future city. But a year later, the California gold rush began, and the gold-mad hordes charging westward all paused at Salt Lake City for supplies. Within a short time, the city was prospering, and many of the Mormons became rich overnight. This is essentially the history and the legend of the Mormons. The controversy that raged around the authenticity of the Book of Mormon and its teachings is too complicated to discuss here. The point is this: there is enough evidence to believe that a specter, a vision, or an angel visited Joseph Smith, or else he ascertained the location of those plates by some psychic ability, or by pure accident. And wouldn't it be interesting if the story were entirely true? If the elementals, ultra-terrestrials, or some other force did indeed select Joseph Smith, passed along the information about the plates, and engineered the formation of the Mormon religion? All of our great religions were founded in almost the same way. Muhammad was just an Arab tradesman until at the age of 40 he began to have visions and conversations with messengers, which led him to organize the Muslim religion and write the Quran. More recent religions, such as the Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses, were established by men who claimed communication with supernatural beings and often issued amazing prophecies that came true. Throughout history, common men have had uncommon experiences that have changed them instantly, and in many cases even changed the whole fabric of the period in which they lived. A Jewish tent maker named Saul was once on the road to Damascus to help suppress the rise of Christianity when, according to tradition, a blinding light appeared in the sky and a voice converted him on the spot. He became St. Paul. Two groups of forces have always been involved in the cosmic charade. Early man quickly learned to separate them into the good and evil, and gave each new god and demon a name. In the interests of clarity, we shall label the good guys the Alpha Group and the bad guys the Omega Group. The Alpha Group gave man a set of ethics and moral principles, while the Omega Group fostered racism, greed, and violence. As time passed, the two groups began imitating each other's tactics, and the task of discriminating between them became impossibly difficult. In his confusion, man soon began to associate everything that happened around him to one of the groups. Natural catastrophes and accidents were automatically blamed on the Omega Group. This led to the development of pure superstition and the awesome, irrational fear of all ultra-terrestrials. Things reached a peak in the Middle Ages. Then, every new and radical invention was regarded as an invention of the devil, and men such as Galileo, who came up with the new scientific discoveries, running contrary to the accepted cosmological view, were jailed or burned at the stake. The Omega Group delighted in spreading false interpretations of the universe and false religious teachings. For every Buddha and Muhammad, there were 10,000 Cyrus Teeds. Who was Cyrus Teed? He believed that the universe was a sphere, and that the earth was hollow, and that we live on the inside of it. Born in 1839, Teed took up the study of alchemy in Utica, New York. And at the age of 30, he received his first visit from a beautiful female entity who materialized in his laboratory. Following the pattern of such contacts, she first informed him of his past incarnations. He had been mighty kings and great men in past lives, naturally. No one ever approached by these entities has ever been identified as of lesser station. Then she proceeded to give him a detailed history of the cosmos, complete with her own special terminology, which, of course, he adopted. He began to write pamphlets and books on this new cellular cosmogony, become a powerful public speaker, and gradually built a following for his profitable Koreshan cult. He used the pseudonym Koresh. He settled finally in Fort Myers, Florida, where he established in New Jerusalem with about 200 followers. He died in 1908 of injuries resulting from an altercation with the local sheriff. Teed had promised that he would rise again after death. He was buried in a concrete tomb on the island of Estero, and a violent hurricane carried his tomb off in 1921. His body was never recovered. This event gave the Koreshan cult new impetus, and it survived into the 1940s. Teed-like ideas permeate the thousands of books written in every language by percipients and contactees. He proposed, for example, the existence of a super sun that served as the ultimate source of the universe. Albert K. Bender claimed that the space people described this central body to him also. Many variations of this concept exist in literature, long before Albert Einstein published his famous theory of relativity in 1905. Einsteinian ideas were being expounded by the ultra-terrestrials and published by enthused percipients. The Big Bang theory, currently in favor with leading astronomers, is that the universe began when all matter was condensed in a single point, which then exploded. The fragments of that explosion, including our own solar system, are now hurling outwards from the center at tremendous velocity, but eventually they will follow the curvature of space, as envisioned by Einstein, and return to reform a new central body. Then the whole cycle will start all over again. Teed and his ilk have been talking about this same thing in their own peculiar way for centuries. Scientists and doctors who have examined people claiming visions and visits with ultra-terrestrials have been puzzled by their apparent normality. In many cases, the percipients have seemed too unintelligent, unimaginative, uneducated, and too sincere to have simply invented the complicated, profusely detailed stories they relate. The contactee syndrome is not a form of insanity, but insanity, particularly paranoid schizophrenia, frequently develops after the contacts begin. Investigators, however, are still debating which came first in some cases, insanity or contact. The first complete psychological study of a percipient took place in the 1890s when Theodore Flournoy, a professor of psychology at the University of Geneva, investigated the strange phenomena surrounding a girl known as Helene Smith. Beginning in March 1892, Miss Smith started to receive messages through automatic writing, a process in which the percipient merely holds the pen and some other force moves it. Soon she was going into trances and speaking in a man's voice with an Italian accent. He identified himself as Leopold and proved to be something of a rascal, prefacing his communications with phrases such as, "I am here. I wish to be master of this sitting." Then all kinds of poltergeistic activity would begin. Later, however, Victor Hugo, the deceased author, came through the medium and offered advice on how to handle the evil Leopold. The clash between Leopold and Victor Hugo escalated into a classic ultra-terrestrial game, just as the modern UFO contactees are caught up in the games waged between the spacemen and the evil men in black. Then at 3:15 a.m. on the morning of September 5th, 1896, Helene woke up and had a strange vision. She viewed, she said, a foreign landscape with a beautiful blue-pink lake, whose shores were joined by a transparent bridge. A crowd of peculiar people approached the bridge. A man of dark complexion, carrying an instrument somewhat resembling a carriage lantern in appearance, which being pressed emitted flames and which seemed to be a flying machine, stood on the center of the bridge. Using this instrument, he flew off the bridge, touched the water, and flew back again. By the end of that September, the dark-complexioned man had become part of Helene's life. He appeared and disappeared suddenly when she was alone and fully conscious. Often he spoke to her in a strange, unknown tongue. His name was Astane, and he was from Mars, he told her soberly. He looked more like he was Asian or East Indian. On a number of occasions he guided her to his home on Mars, at least in her visions and hallucinations. Usually he was dressed in beautifully embroidered robes. Miss Smith described at length the vehicles on Mars, stating they had neither wheels nor horses, and people seemed to fly about in them. Helene quickly learned to speak the strange Martian language. Her automatic writing also developed a new twist. She began writing in unknown symbols, and gradually, over many months, Professor Flournoy was able to decipher them and translate Martian into French. These symbols had the oriental characteristics that had been so often described by modern flying saucer contactees who claimed to have been aboard the craft. In later periods, Helene would sometimes lapse into this language in the course of normal conversation without realizing she was doing so. It was not, Flournoy noted, the kind of gibberish that children make up when they are playing at Chinese or Indian. It was an actual language that could be broken down and studied. Other Martians turned up answering to the names of Ramy and SNL. Soon Helene's world was peopled with strange beings with long hair and long fingers, both common characteristics of the UFO entities described by contactees, who led her off on spiritual trips to other planets. On November 2nd, 1898, Helene reported rising at 6:15 a.m. and feeling an invisible arm clasp itself about her waist. She said, "And then I saw myself surrounded by a rose-colored light, which generally shows itself when a Martian vision is coming," she said. She found herself in a section of country peopled by men altogether different from those who inhabit our globe. The tallest of all were 3 feet high, and the majority were an inch or two shorter. Their hands were immense, about 10 inches long by 8 inches broad. They were ornamented with very long black nails. Their feet were also of great size. These little men of 1898 resided in simple houses, all low, long, without windows or doors, and each house had a little tunnel about 10 feet long running from it into the earth. The roofs were flat, supplied with chimneys or tubes. All of the things described in Flournoy's 447-page study, From India to the Planet Mars, published in 1900, have been repeated endlessly in the occult and UFO literature of other cases. The little men have since earned a special place in flying saucer lore. Flournoy speculated that Leopold and Astaine could have been the same entity in different guises. Perhaps he was aware of Swedenborg's warning centuries earlier that the ultra-terrestrials could assume any identity, and more interestingly, if the percipient accepted their identity, they would eventually believe themselves that they were Moses, Napoleon, or Astaine. Joseph Smith and his friends were treated with visits not only from Moroni, but also from entities claiming to be John the Baptist and the apostles Peter, James, and John. Our ultra-terrestrials are ham actors who delight in assuming roles and adopting names from ancient mythology. Early theologians were kept busy recording the endless names of angels and demons. Numbers are also flourished indiscriminately in both religious and contactee literature. The Bible contains long chapters giving elaborate but seemingly meaningless measurements. In Oaspi, a book produced by Automatic Writing in 1880, we learned that Egypt had a population of 13 million at the time of Moses' birth. 4 million of these were enslaved Hebrews. Today's Egypt population is about 35 million, not much of an increase in 2,000 years. Page after page in Oaspi lists the total number of spirits and angels and drooks, the Oaspi word for the Omega group. This numbers game has been extended into the modern UFO phenomena. On August 7th, 1965, 3 prominent men in Venezuela were present at a UFO landing and had a conversation with 2 tall, specifically 7 to 8 feet, beings with long yellow hair, large penetrating eyes, and one-piece metallic coverall-type garments. The witnesses, who included a well-known Venezuelan doctor, claimed they communicated through telepathy, and among the questions they asked was, "Are there any beings like you living among us?" "Yes," came the reply, 2,417,805. That's a very precise answer, but many other contactees have thought to ask the same question, and the answers are wildly variable, from 75 to 10,000 in the city of Los Angeles alone, to up in the millions. Our long-haired friends also indulge in nonsensical prophecy on a grand scale. When asked when the world is going to end, they are apt to give a precise date in the near future. Some people have actually started building arks on their say-so. One group in Denmark erected a hasty atom bomb shelter in 1967 and settled down to await Armageddon that December. Who is going to be elected president in the next election? The elementals announce with grave authority that Frank Sinatra or Mae West is in line for the job. The study of glossolalia has had a small group of scholarly followers for years. This is the attempted translation of the mysterious languages spoken by ultra-terrestrials, mediums, and church groups who indulge in speaking in tongues. It seems to be a conglomerate of many languages, both ancient and modern, and Flournoy wasn't the first to try to unravel it. There are books filled with symbols and translations similar to, but never exactly like, Helene Smith's Martian language. Dozens of these phony alphabets have been published in dead seriousness. A retired schoolteacher named John W. Dean collected the testimony of flying saucer contactees and the elaborate information passed along by the space people for his book, Flying Saucers Close Up. The project must have taken years. He devotes many pages to listing unknown planets far out in the cosmos, as described by the ultra-terrestrials, and giving encyclopedic data about each one. Dean lists hundreds of unknown planets in this fashion. The group in this particular table happens to be from the star system of Alpha Tauri, 53.6 light-years away, but anyone with a basic knowledge of orbital mechanics and a slide rule can check the mass of figures and discover that many of these alleged planetary systems are quite impossible. The cosmos of the ultra-terrestrials must be filled with colliding planets weaving and spinning in defiance of all the known laws of motion. In Flying Saucers Close-Up, Mr. Dean also presents a complete vocabulary in the written language of the folks from the planet called Corindor. Some of the symbols bear a striking resemblance to runic ciphers. His book is only a minor example of the privately published material circulated to about 2,000 hardcore flying saucer believers. Over the past 20 years, the ultra-terrestrials have constructed a whole fantasy world through the contactees, a cosmos that includes great intergalactic councils. And as soon as we grow up, we allegedly may be permitted to join. On other levels, in different frames of reference, believers speak in terms of other planes. The most common belief shared by every culture on this planet is that there are 7 distinct worlds or realities. We live on the lowest rung of the ladder. If there's a hell, we must be living in it. Numerous religious sects are concerned with Holy Ghost apparitions and the speaking in tongues phenomenon, which they accept as verification of their beliefs. The United Pentecostal Church, for example, finds great meaning in such manifestations, and they occur constantly within the church. Church bulletins and publications are filled with accounts of these events. The newsletter, Global Witness, June-July 1970, described the following as reported by a group in Peru. On April 28th, as they were praying, the 10-year-old daughter suddenly went into what they thought was a fit of convulsions. She began to jerk and shake all over. Her terrified mother rushed to her side to attempt to help her daughter, but an unseen hand restrained her, and a voice urged her to leave the girl alone. In just a few moments, this little girl, who did not know what the Holy Ghost was, began to speak in a strange but lovely new language. The following Tuesday night, the oldest boy was marvelously filled with the Holy Ghost. He rejoiced in the Spirit and spoke with tongues for over an hour. Convulsive seizures are common to all the frames of reference. Many UFO contactees suffer chronic headaches, muscular soreness, and other symptoms of such seizures after their experiences. These fits could be caused by some disorder of the frontal lobe of the brain or by some electromagnetic wave directed at the frontal lobe. Primitive peoples usually regarded such fits as demonic possessions. One of the world's foremost psychologists, Dr. Carl G. Jung, examined the socio-religious aspects of the UFO rumors and published a shrewd analysis called Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky, published in 1959. He correlated the UFO reports with psychic manifestations and suggested that the phenomena were products of the collective consciousness of mankind. Quoting, "The psychic aspect plays so great a role that it cannot be left out of account," Dr. Jung stated. The discussion of it leads to psychological problems which involve just as fantastic possibilities or impossibilities as the approach from the physical side. End quote. Another scientist, Dr. Jacques Vallée, an astronomer and computer specialist, spent several years sifting UFO accounts and comparing them with the earlier fairy lore of Europe. He felt that the two phenomena shared a single cause. In Passport to Magonia, 1969, Vallée offered a catalog of 923 flying saucer landings from 1868 to 1968, many of which included the classic characteristics of the more universal psychic manifestations. Quoting, "Is it reasonable to draw a parallel between religious apparitions, the fairy faith, the reports of dwarf-like beings with supernatural powers, the airship tales in the United States in the last century, and the present stories of UFO landings? I would strongly argue that it is, for one simple reason. The mechanisms that have generated these various beliefs are identical." End quote. The crux of the problem is to reach beyond the endless reports of varied manifestations and seek out the source, the physical, psychic, or psychological mechanism which has inspired these beliefs. All of these incidents are subjective. That is, we have only the testimony of the witnesses that these peculiar events even occurred. Although millions of people have claimed encounters with the ultraterrestrials in the past 2,000 years, many millions of others have not had such experiences. Astronomers and physicists are neither trained nor equipped to deal with a purely subjective phenomenon. Only a few examples have been given, but it is apparent that Joseph Smith, Cyrus Teeds, Helene Smith, and even John Dean were all confronted by the same basic phenomenon. Each approached it in a different, individualized way, and each received information structured to support his own beliefs. Albert K. Bender and Teeds both explored black magic and alchemy. Both claimed they received complex cosmic theories from parahuman entities. Dean asked for and received elaborate facts and figures about extraterrestrial beings and the planets they supposedly inhabited. Like Swedenborg and the biblical prophet Enoch, Helene Smith was shown other worlds and led to believe that she was visiting other planets. Reinhold Schmidt was transported to the center of the pyramid. Bender was taken to underground bases in Antarctica. Others have visited the underground palaces of fairies and the subterranean cities of the Darrows. It is not likely that any of these places exist in reality. It is more likely that these people made hallucinogenic excursions or mind trips guided by some force which is capable of manipulating the electrical circuits of the brain. The only alternative explanation is that all these people were liars and hoaxers or lunatics. None of the scientists, psychiatrists, and theologians who have investigated these matters have been able to accept such a simple explanation. A remarkable man named Aleister Crowley, born in 1875, became known as the wickedest man in the world through his work in black magic. He too claimed to receive visits from an angel, and he was at the center of a large cult around the turn of the century. He was noted for sexually liberating his female followers, and he published a number of books expounding on his personal cosmology. Those books enjoyed a revival of popularity among the youth subculture in the 60s and 70s, and even more of them are now in print than ever before. In 1939, a young rocket fuel scientist, John Whiteside Parsons, joined the Crowley cult and burrowed into the dark world of magic and the occult. Another practitioner of the mysteries crossed Parsons' path in 1946, and the two became close friends, combining their efforts to conjure up demons and elementals. The newcomer claimed he had a personal angel, a beautiful red-haired entity whom he called the Empress. The two men donned robes and engaged in secret mystical rites. According to Parsons, they had some success. On the night of January 14, 1946, the electric power failed as they were mumbling incantations, and his companion was struck by something on the right shoulder, knocking a candle from his hand. "He called me," Parsons wrote, "and we observed a brownish-yellow light about 7 feet high. I brandished a magical sword, and it disappeared. His right arm was paralyzed for the rest of the night." End quote. His fellow practitioner demonstrated his friendship by stealing Parsons' girlfriend, Betty. Then he proposed a business venture and got Parsons to put up $17,000. The next thing Parsons knew, the fellow had purchased a yacht and sailed off to Florida with Betty. In a letter to the aging Crowley dated July 5, 1946, Parsons said, "Here I am in Miami, pursuing the children of my folly. I have them well tied up. They cannot move without going to jail. However, I am afraid that most of the money has already been spent. I'll be lucky to salvage $3,000 to $5,000. The so-called friend attempted to escape me by sailing at 5 p.m. and performed the full invocation to Bartzabel, which is a curse. At the same time, however, his ship was struck by a sudden squall off the coast, which ripped off his sails and forced him back to port, where I took the boat in custody." End quote. During one of their rites, Parsons was given this prophecy. "Babylon is incarnate upon the earth today, awaiting the proper hour of her manifestation, and in that day my work will be accomplished, and I shall be blown away upon the breath of the Father." End quote. A rocket fuel explosion at a laboratory in Pasadena in 1952 did indeed blow away the ill-fated Parsons. The games of the ultra-terrestrials never end. Another entry in the Great Celestial Con is an outfit called Coscott Interplanetary Incorporated of Orlando, Florida, who have had difficulties with law enforcement agencies in several states, according to the Better Business Bureau. Coscott has been pushing Dare to be Great, a motivational course consisting of a series of 4 tapes that will tell you how to get rich. The 4 tapes cost only $7,700, but the investment can be quickly recouped by selling the course to others. The whole scheme is based upon a pyramid plan, with each student peddling the course to new seekers of truth. Unfortunately, the population of a state cannot support an indefinite selling plan that depends on recruiting other sellers and students, and the Better Business Bureau has labeled the whole enterprise doubtful and unrealistic. The tapes deal largely with the same philosophy and cosmology found in all occult lore. This has been Chapter 10 from Our Haunted Planet by John Keel.